we are going to head into our last talk of the day, which, yes, as you can see, is a multi-person talk. And I hope that everyone has saved some brains because we have saved a pretty big topic for last, which is very exciting. So do double introductions here. We have on the stage Brianna McHorse, an engineering manager and ML engineer with expertise in generative models and natural language processing. She leads the team that's currently building the systems, AI, and otherwise behind Hidden Door's co-creative narrative game platform, where the challenges range from structuring expressive words to determining the meaning of death. She also has a whole PhD about why horses evolved from a single toe, which I would love to ask about, but I need to do my job right now.
Catch me after the talk.
Excellent. Also on stage, we have Chris Foster, the game director of Hidden Door. Prior to Hidden Door, he was design director at Harmonix Music Systems, lead designer at Turbine Games, and designer, writer, and programmer of Last Resort for Firehose Games. Among his many projects from those times, he was the design lead for the Beatles rock band, project lead for Green Day rock band, and lead content designer for Lord of the Rings Online Shadows of Angmar. Chris has taught game design at Northeastern University and has spoken on game development at numerous conferences. He's recently released an indie game made with his son, Ian, titled Loose Nozzles. Chris is Hidden Door's infection vector for vampire survivors and plays Too Much Power Watch Simulator. Wonderful. And you're here to talk about AI.
Thanks so much for having us. Congratulations on making it to the end of what I'm sure was an excellent Roguelike Celebration 2023 for everyone. We have been introduced, so we're going to move right past this slide to talk about Hidden Door. Hidden Door was founded to do something new and creative with machine learning and do it ethically. One of our founders, Hilary Mason, literally co-wrote the book on ethics and data science. For us, doing something new meant doing creative things that are otherwise impossible or impractical. For us, that creative space is story. Here's a very brief teaser reel that we made to show what we're building. So our talk, in this talk, we're going to present how generative AI can change how we tackle the challenges for us in building interactive stories. What we've learned in exploring this new frontier, we hope you can apply to other types of games.
So let's get started with talking a little bit about how we make interactive story games in the first place. Humans are the original storytellers, so handwritten content in interactive story games is the gold standard because it's good. People dedicate their whole careers to writing stories, designing narrative, and this writing is the heart of a game's emotional experience. But in a game context, where we want interaction rather than reading a single fixed linear story, you get into structures like branching narrative in order to be responsive to player choices. Mapping this out over dozens and dozens of player choices, all with cascading consequences that you want to be meaningful, both becomes a massive amount of work and a challenge to wrangle. And it's also limited by human scale, therefore it points you at certain kinds of content or budgets. For example, you can skip over that one. Hades has a lovely set of story branches with real emotional impact. It has an absolutely enormous list of conditions, like what happens when, and it's rendered by over 20,000 unique voice lines. So it feels like it's handwritten and responsive to your specific experience because it is, and that is a huge amount of work. Hades also, as I am sure many of us know, features procedural generation, not in its narrative, but in its level design. And ProcGen is awesome. It's generating experiences through rules-based systems, emergent behavior. It really shines with things that can be structured, like those levels in Hades, physical movement, stuff like that. Story, while it does have structure, is a little bit harder. So Dwarf Fortress is a classic example that hangs out near this zone, but isn't really story exactly. It's a very complicated text-based simulation. It leads to a ton of interesting emergent behavior, but the meaning comes from our human brains. Our friend Lynn Cherney wrote a really nice article on trying to turn Dwarf Fortress events into a narrative, and she used a variety of approaches and found that even when she sifted for interesting bits of emergent story, like this spy who had the tables turned on him, it was difficult to convey it in interesting ways. So information alone, even connected information rendered fluently, does not a compelling narrative make. Wildermyth is an example of working really excellently within ProcGen's constraints to create expressive stories. It uses a ton of procedurally generated content interleaved with handwritten content in the storytelling to great effect, especially as the characters grow and change through time. So in this case, individual events are heavily procedural and requirements-based, but then there's also a lot of very thoughtfully handwritten content that makes plot arcs feel really good with things like villains who have real motivations. And then eventually, when you run out of the custom arcs, you get into slightly more generic, again, procedurally generated arcs, for example. So on the whole, this interleaved handwritten and procedurally generated approach is really powerful because each approach has its own limitations on the quality and number and kinds of stories you can tell for any given budget. If you combine them, you can expect the total space of the kind of story you can tell, you can expand it considerably. But that still draws a boundary around the kinds of things you can do with the time and money you have. It's hard to get enough freedom and enough satisfying structure at the same time. There will always be things that your players want to do, or adopt, or romance that you didn't plan for or didn't intend to be adopted or romanced. Chris, I can't hear you at all. Nope.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, if we could get past those limits, what might it look like? There's one place that we draw a lot of inspiration from, for interactive storytelling, especially with a collaborative bent, and that's the Dungeon Master. Human Dungeon Master is infinitely expressive. They can improvise a meaningful, satisfying story to the player's needs, and they can meaningfully balance story and gameplay. And particularly for our interest and our business model, they can adapt to any world or intellectual property. Now, we think we can start to explore this space and these type of experiences by applying the new tool of generative AI. A generative AI doesn't turn a computer into a human storyteller, and it doesn't replace these other tools. It complements them and significantly expands the limits again. It makes new types of interactive narrative games possible. But what even is generative AI? Generative AI, particularly in the form of large language models or LLMs, process vast amounts of information scraped from the internet. In processing this data, an LLM identifies patterns in that data and can generate responses to inquiries based on those patterns. Those responses are unique, expected expressions of those patterns, which reflect and remix the information found on the internet. In our case, some of that information that's being remixed are stories or pieces of stories. So an LLM is seemingly a magic container filled with anything and everything, available if you know just how to ask the right questions for it. But LLMs clearly have their limits. And to understand those limits, I love this metaphor from the New Yorker. LLMs are like the JPEG of the internet. They compress vast pools of data and capture the gist of its knowledge, but they blur the details in ways that you're not supposed to notice. Some of that blurring is a positive for us, interesting hallucinations that can take an experience like a story or a picture in unexpected directions. But some of that blurring just sends you off the rails or straight into any one of a number of nightmares. But ultimately, machine learning, AI, is just math. It doesn't reason. It just plays on patterns. It literally just figures out what's the next words to do after the previous words. It doesn't understand what it's saying, and it's probably not going to take over the world. Now, when I try to think about how to describe what it's like to make a game with AI, I came up with this metaphor. It's like weaving a beautiful tapestry with many, many threads, but each of those threads is a snake. Technically, they can go where you want to, but they probably don't always want to help you the way you want. And if you play with them long enough, you're probably going to get bit.
So the biggest bites to be aware of are ethical. There's also plenty of technical challenges, especially if you want to be experimenting with the latest models, because a lot of the really cutting edge stuff you can't just import into your code environment at the drop of a hat. And financially, because of the size of the models and the expense of hosting them or querying providers, the costs can rack up quickly. So, badly used, AI tools give you high volumes of low quality content at great financial cost, while treating creative folks like disposable golden geese. So, the problems are serious, and we don't have time to go into depth here, but I wanted to flag a few of the more important ethical risks that we think about, and for anyone who is thinking about working with these generative models. So first, there's bias. These models are a reflection and compression of the data they're trained on. Like Chris said, huge swaths of the internet, which is not known for being unbiased. So not only do they reproduce that bias, they magnify it, especially racism and sexism, but stereotypes of all kinds. Whether it's in image generation or text generation, the positive default is generally white men. The second huge issue ethically is intellectual property. So generative text and art models are trained on big chunks of stuff, including people's work, especially the art models, most of whom didn't give permission for their stuff to be included. And a lot of corporations really seem like they would like to just take people's content, train models on them, and then get rid of the people, or at least pay them very, very little. So as we use these generative models, and if you're thinking about using them, it's important to be thoughtful about what models you're choosing and what you have permission to fine tune on, stuff like that. There's a reason that at Hidden Door we're aiming to work with authors and artists to build something new, not just an AI-generated replacement of what they were already doing. And our first playable world is The Wizard of Oz, which is in the public domain, and that's on purpose. There is also a little bit of a technical challenge to avoid IP leaking out that's sort of in the public consciousness. So like Star Wars, something like that. Your game will absolutely hallucinate Star Wars content if prompted anywhere near that direction, and that does not mean that you have the rights to use it. Finally, AI will just make stuff up. So in a game context, that's mostly just annoying. It'll break immersion. We don't want it to go off the rails or make declarations about things existing in the game that don't, things like that. But it can get bad real quick if it's in the realm of, say, guides to foraging mushrooms that people generate with AI and then self-publish on Amazon. Remember, these models don't have knowledge, they don't reason, so it's important to keep that in mind and not treat them that way. So there's some heavy responsibility here, and obviously some very dangerous pitfalls you can fall into. But for the rest of this talk, we'll focus on what it looks like to use these tools well. What can it look like if we genuinely work hand in hand with human creativity? What kinds of new experiences and games might be possible now with this new tool?
What is this new tool good at? What are its strengths? Think of it in these three ways. Generative AI is expressive. By recombining the patterns found in its massive corpora of data, machine learning can create unique, unexpected expressions in language and art. Instead of emerging out of constructed systems, as in ProcGen, they rise unpredictably from patterns in the data. You cannot know what they might do. You will be surprised, for better and worse. Generative AI is also responsive. A key element of large language models is that they respond to language. They're driven by expressive input. And there is delight that can come from both choosing input as your approach and seeing how your input is interpreted. But this input is very much a risk. If the model is a mystery box filled with delight and terribleness, expressive input can unearth the good and the bad in unpredictable ways. Finally, generative AI is expansive because of the sheer breadth of content used to construct LLMs. You can take them almost anywhere, not literally anywhere, but many, many more possibilities are immediately available to developers than when using a procedural system for a similar effort. Which makes it kind of an unbounded problem space. If you can go everywhere, how do you guide the system to the places where better experiences, or in our case, better stories lie? And our game is aiming to use all of these facets of generative AI, building a social role-playing game that lets you improvise like at a tabletop, that can adapt to any work of fiction. But leveraging all of those within a game hits some unique challenges. A game enables agency, and while unbounded infinite agency is possible, that's not gameplay, that's creative play, it's make-believe. Gameplay exists within constraints, and those constraints must be applied consistently in order to become a viable game space. AI sucks at being consistent. Stories themselves they exist within coherent structures of meaning, and machine learning is really good at forgetting to be coherent. One other way to think about the challenges of using AI in games and in stories is the fact that I think right now the state of the art in AI is very good at capturing moments in time, a single picture, a tiny snippet of text maybe. But if you try to make it chain moments together to go from, say, one picture to a video, you generally get nightmare fuel. It doesn't understand how to be consistent and coherent through time. Now, this technology is changing every year. Today's limits are likely to be surpassed in time, but we are dealing with the here and now. And this affects us because stories themselves are experiences through time. They're complex experiences with overt and subtle structures, and those structures and their coherent expression is what makes a story impactful and resonant. So can we constrain AI to solve these above issues without stifling that generative goodness that surprises and delights? We think we can by using it as a tool in a larger suite of tools. We can combine its strengths with the strengths of handwritten and procedural content to get around each one's limits.
So given those strengths and limits, we'll share in a bit more detail some of what we've learned about making a game with generative AI. How do we use it for what it's good at, and where do we start? A useful lens that we think about it with is order versus chaos, where order is systems, rules, procedural generation, game design. It's structures that control and power specific experiences. Emergence comes out, you can still get emergent behavior that's surprising, but you can always use your understanding of the structure to suss out the causes. By comparison, generative AI is chaos. There are no obvious structures or rules. When it does what you want, you can't always be totally sure why, or whether subtle changes will provide correspondingly subtle changes in the output. Left to its own devices, the longer you let it do its thing, keep generating in one go, the less coherent and reliable it becomes. That's kind of another facet of the moving through time thing. And we don't know what's in there. I cannot emphasize enough how big the pile of data this stuff is trained on is. Like, it is not within human ken. So we know some of what's in there, but it's too big to wrap your head around. The trick is that the chaos is the good part we're aiming for. That's the part that opens up new areas of possibility. The chaos is what allows the generative stuff to be so expansive, so responsive, and sometimes so delightfully surprising. But you have to make sure you also have the order and control. Because if you don't control it, and you rely on chaos as the sole approach to building your game, it gets out of control very, very quickly. So, in our opinion, the solution to this is finding a way to contain the chaos within order. So we let generative AI do what it does best within some very structured boundaries. And to do this, we break down the story game into a bunch of different pieces, each of which uses different techniques, sometimes multiple, to collectively create a result. So I will talk through an example that combines handwritten content, procedural methods, several kinds of machine learning, including generative LLMs. So for this, I'm going to focus on how we process a player's intent, or what they say they want to do, into what happens in the turn. So this is the equivalent of me being like, okay, I jump over the chasm, and then my DM tells me what happens. The composable approach is about, instead of just using generative AI to decide what happens, we break it up into smaller, more specific tasks that contain the chaos within structure. So instead of letting the garden grow wild around the path the player takes, we pick a few beds where we can let a handful of carefully chosen plants grow a little chaotically. For example, we use the LLM to suggest what could happen, provide suggestions for what the player might try if they want ideas, render what happens in more expressive prose that's tuned to the genre, the IP, the world that it's in, or to fill in specific details within a larger structure. We also have places where we split off tasks that are really well suited to more ordered tools like classic machine learning, procgen, and handwritten stuff. So this is stuff like skill check. Does the player need to roll dice? It's boring if they have to roll dice to open a cabinet. Tracking conditions and status effects, making decisions about how we should adjust story factors like mood or drama or pacing, and stuff like genre. So we use embeddings a lot here, which is a numerical representation of where a word fits in space, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But first.
Another handwritten structure we use is the literal skeleton of our narratives, the arcs, tropes, and beats that define the shape and flow of a story. Here are some examples from a design jam where we, as a team, identified some of the tropes we wanted to see in our engine one day. Our engine is consciously a trope engine. The familiarity of common story elements is a feature, not a bug. It's satisfying as a player to find these expectations or have your expectations met, and it's perhaps more satisfying to get the opportunity to thoughtfully subvert them as a player. Our approach lets us write these tropes as very short, generic, handwritten structures, and then use LLMs to give them a unique contextual expression.
My next talk will be about how Figma and Notion are both multiplayer games, but one of them is collaborative and one of them is competitive. We used Figma for the design jam. Right. There are also other bigger things that we figure out as part of resolving one of these turns in the story game. So for example, we check against things like what does the plot need? Or what matches the expected physics of the world? Is there magic? Is there high technology? Are we in SpongeBob SquarePants world? And we need to make sure that SpongeBob, who is canonically vegetarian, doesn't eat meat. But the systems we've built that answer those questions are themselves a garden of approaches. They follow the same pattern of chaos within order, depending on the specific task. So ultimately, this approach is a really effective way to divide and conquer the problem space. It lets you put order where it's helpful, and let the generated chaos grow into something beautiful and expressive and sometimes a little weird.
So as we've built out and tuned these systems, we've seen improvements in plot coherence and getting content that's, borderline creative, and the quality of the writing generated is better, and matching some of the styles that we're aiming at. As we've gone through that process of iterating, we've learned a few things that we think have been useful for our approach and could be useful if you start to experiment with generative AI.
So first, keep things as simple as possible. Great programming tip, great game design tip, also applies to generative AI. So for example, whenever possible, we reduce something to a ranking problem. This is because picking from among several options is easier than deciding exactly what you want in a vacuum. It also lets you change what you prioritize later, because you can just change the weighting of the ranking. We also control a lot by leaning on categories or other predefined structures, like the trope threads Chris talked about, which themselves have variables that we can select from categories. And finally, we use a lot of pre-computed data instead of generating things live. So for example, I mentioned those word embeddings, and that's essentially a numeric representation of a word in multidimensional number space, which is built from how the word is used in context with other words in a big pile of text. So in our knowledge base, we have a sense of the genre-ness of different words. So instead of using a generative model to say, hey, make this really sci-fi, we can actually get a weighted score for the sentence, and then it's turned into a ranking problem. Or we can assess things like which piece of dialogue is most romantic, or what would a prideful baker in the land of the Wizard of Oz keep in their apron pockets. Simplification gets you better results, faster, less expensively, and it's also a lot easier for humans to debug and adjust.
Another thing we've learned is that you have to be careful with these constraints. Generative AI, if you impose too little on it, it will sort of become incoherent. But if you put too much into it, it can lock up, or it can be very contrary to what you're trying to accomplish. You have to remember that the chaos is the good bit. You have to give it some space to run with its ideas. One of the metaphors that I think of in working with it is you have to treat it kind of like you're an improv partner. You want to try to find ways to yes and its ideas. Maybe see if you can match one of its suggestions to trope threads that you have written down, so that it becomes a new rail to run with that can still be treated with coherence down the line. This is an ongoing back and forth iterative process, as with many other aspects of game development. Another metaphor that I like to use in thinking about how to work well with generative AI is that it's not just a tool, it's a kind of partner. Writing prompts as instructions for machine learning is very similar to writing design documentation. You're writing plans to be interpreted. They're interpreted by someone other than yourself, and they're often interpreted in ways you don't expect. The process of iterating in that process, that conversation with the AI, has a similar kind of satisfaction to learning to collaborate with other coworkers and write the design documents that they need to do their best. The thing is, hopefully, unlike the other employees you work with, machine learning really doesn't like to show its work or explain what it's doing. There are no visible processes to view and adjust. Why did it come up with that answer? Who knows? It's just a billion sets of little numbers that it tumbles through to get to an answer. How do you redirect it? Guess. You maybe add some adverbs to your sentences, and it will change the flow of things. These processes are, as we said, just math in a big black box. And that leads to thinking of tuning LLMs sort of like a weird negotiation, in the worst case, sort of a hostage negotiation. Their AI systems and their illogical logic are infuriatingly opaque. The missing piece in this is explainability.
And this is understandably a very hot area of research, because understanding why it spits out the results it does opens the door to controlling more about the results. So, for example, here's some recent exploratory work by the folks at Anthropic. They make Claude AI a language model, where they've clustered pieces of the model into these specialty areas of focus that are responsible for generating certain kinds of things, like legal language. So this kind of thing I think will be really important going forward, being able to push a model into a certain region of generation space by slightly more sophisticated methods.
While we're limited in explainability by using a composable system with many small components, it gives us an ability to sort of interpret, intuit, and tune each element independently. I like to think of it as a series of lenses that we can focus, that we can tweak, that we look through to get to a sharper story. This approach lets us coax out surprising results, like finding an interesting interpretation of an affliction to put in a village, and then making sure that another part of our system actually delivers dialogue that does the rhyming that's implied by another. Now, thinking of all of these individual components, it's easy to lose the forest for the trees. So something that's also really important is to use good design principles and try to always work back from the experience that you're trying to aim. In our case, we developed some common language for how to think about story, coherence, agency, replayability, and pacing, creating a shared language for people of many different disciplines to discuss experientially what we want to get out of these models. And that gives us new ways to think about how to tune all these disparate parts towards a common end.
And it's a lot of fun to collaborate, even if we sometimes speak very different languages. So in conclusion, we are very excited to combine AI with procedural tech and game design to make some really cool new games. We have learned that doing this involves breaking things down into composable little blocks of chaos within order, use the structure, go for simpler solutions wherever possible, learn some effective ways of collaborating and especially iterating quickly with your new robot coworker, and don't neglect to think through the ethical part of it at the start rather than trying to slap it on at the end because it won't work nearly as well. over the last year of development, we've gotten to watch the game grow from almost entirely order to almost entirely chaos, and finally now to this lovely mixed blend, which even as a developer or a designer testing behaviors or debugging, it's honestly really fun to play. So it's very cool to discover what's possible with generative AI and watch that change as we go. It's an exciting time to be doing the work.
And we're excited to see what you might do with the same technology in your own procedural and other experiences. Thanks so much for listening to our talk. Come check us out at hiddendoor.co, and special thanks to everyone at the studio who helped us with this talk. Night.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you both. I really appreciate it. This is a really big topic to try and fit in. I think that you handled it really well. It's like we said in chat. Yeah, we want it. Yeah, you sped run it, and we wanted to find someone who really was an expert and uses it practically, and then understands the upsides and the downsides. Since obviously this conference often lives at that intersection of the procedural and AI. So thank you very much. I'll drop just one question in because it's like the top upvoted one the most, which is from Hyper Gardens. Do you have any advice for a generative AI service that is ethical as far as is out there, that a small designer could use, kind of guilt and grime free?
That's a great question. Not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I would think that there are open source models out there that provide a way. I feel like Hugging Face is a place where there are things to explore. Each one is filled with its own material, so
but at least with open source you can look at what data goes into it. I would have to do some poking around because I bet you there are people working specifically on trying to put together more thoughtful data sets, but
no, that's good. And I think it's a tricky one off the cuff, but maybe that's something that people can put their suggestions in the map obelisk and on the comments in this video once it's uploaded, and collect some resources. So wonderful. Okay, well, thank you both so much for being a wonderful closer to the conference. And
thank you.
Excellent
I
talk.
will pop into the chat and see if there's more conversation to be had. But thank you, and thanks everyone for watching.
All right, excellent.